Alright guys, welcome to this video. This video is going to be as informative as possible. It's going to be all about my bench setup. So I've gotten some messages, some people have been asking me, your bench is like, so and so, it's pretty great, like what do you do, like what's your setup, what are some tips, some tricks. Decided I'd basically take the most important things about the way I set up my bench, the way that I do my bench, all the different aspects of it, try and put it in one video, try to knock out as many of the general questions as possible, because I have gotten some varied questions from different people, asking me for different things, but in the end of the day, it's really all the same question. It's like, how do you set up your bench? Like, what is some general advice you can give to how to set up a bench? And so, what I do might not necessarily be the best for everyone, but I think that my setup is pretty solid. I am really happy with the way that I set up, and technique and setup is the foundation of everything. Like they say that volume is the key to progress, but the key to progressing your volume is by using the right technique, so that when you're benching, you're doing the same thing over and over again consistently. And if you do that, guys, that's how you're gonna make sure that your bench continuously rises. If you don't have the right technique, if you don't have the right setup, nothing's gonna move. So first thing I want to show you guys is a little thing. It's basically everything that I don't want you to do when you're benching. So I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play a little clip right now. So what you guys can see, I'm just gonna let this play first actually, so you guys can just watch. So, as you guys can see based on that clip, there's a lot wrong with that bench. First of all, I think the most glaring thing when you immediately start the clip is that my back is completely flat against the bench. There's a lot of people out there, guys, who will tell you that you need to have a completely flat back when you bench, and that's complete bullshit. You don't need to have a crazy arch. For instance, like there are people who aren't powerlifters, they don't need to shorten the range of motion that much, and for that purpose, you don't need to have a crazy arch, but you do need to brace your back correctly, and you do need to tighten your entire posterior chain, because if you don't, then first of all, you're leaking a lot of power in your bench, and studies have actually shown that in terms of injury prevention, your back is actually in a safer position when it's in an arch. It's much harder to, for instance, slip a disc, have any kind of problem when you're arching your back, as opposed to when you have a flat back. When you have a flat back, it implies there's a lot going wrong. But regardless, on to the next thing though. As you guys noticed from the way that I was benching, the bar path was completely off. It was very skewed. You'll see that my elbows and my shoulders were way over here, and what was happening is I was basically putting the bar across the center portion of my chest here and pressing over like this, which is completely not the range of motion we want. Depending on who you are, the way you're built, you're not necessarily going to land the bar in the exact same spot there, but there is a general consensus on where you want the bar to land. And for me personally, you guys will notice I put it just a bit below my sternum, because I have more of a hard sink when I bench. But everyone is a little different, but the general rule of thumb is at least around the nipple line. And what I found is the best for power output is you want your elbow and your arm to basically form a perpendicular angle at the bottom and to press straight through the elbow itself. You don't want the elbow and the shoulder to be in a disjointed area like this. So bar path was completely skewed there. And the final thing that I think you guys will notice, it's a little bit smaller of a problem, but it's something that I think is still very much worth addressing, is the fact that my hips and my knees are almost at the exact same level in this clip. Me personally, it doesn't take much for me to get my knees below my hips, but having your knees below your hips is how you actually are able to initiate your leg drive. Otherwise, you cannot really press your legs into the ground efficiently, and you can't get any force transfer. Your hips and your knees being at the same level or higher, for your knees to be higher, is something that you don't want to happen. So I'm going to go over now my setup really quick, guys. And basically what I'm going to have going on is, while I explain my setup, I'm going to have different angles going on about showing my setup from all kinds of different angles, so you guys can see how it is that I get into my bench setup from all the different angles, backwards, forwards, sideways. And I'm just going to explain right now, guys. So the way I start setting up for my bench is when I approach the bench, I sit down and I basically sit my feet halfway down the bench. So if the bench is like, let's say a rectangle, it's like, I don't know, like 6 feet long, my feet start just about where the halfway mark is, around 3 feet, right? And this just tends to be that when my feet are there, my back is touching the bar. That's the cue that I use. I know that my feet are in the right position when my back is touching the bar against the bench. What I do then is I then pull myself underneath the bar while trying to keep my feet in essentially the same spot. This is really important, guys, because when I set up my bench, in order to get a good arch, I want my feet as far under my body as possible. So what I do essentially is then once I go underneath the bar, I essentially keep my feet in the same spot and I put my body behind the bar. When I put my body behind the bar, it's like, it's not uncomfortable with my feet. My feet are still in the same spot they were when I started, but it gives me a position behind the bar where I can sort of, first of all, get a really good grip on the bar. It's where I set up my grip positioning, and your grip position is completely on you guys. The way I do it is I have just slight of pinkies on the ring, but whatever you do, that's totally up to you. But what I do is I then grab the bar from the back, and it's at this point it's basically right over where my stomach is if I was to line it up. And then once I grab it with both my hands, I pull. So I'm essentially doing almost like a row. I pull up, and then what I do is I grab it, like I keep holding on to it, I push up out so that my body is essentially up now into the air with my feet in the same exact spot. And then from this position, I start rotating my shoulders until basically my back makes contact with the bench. And then once that happens, I pull myself down a bit through the bench. Just to set my feet once again, because usually at this point I've lost a little bit of the foot positioning, so I set my feet back up, and then I essentially push the bar into the bench to push my body down to reset the arch. And then once the arch is reset, I just brace my back as hard as I can to make sure everything's tight, and then I basically press up. I either get the spot, I press up, whatever it is, that's when I'm ready to go. So when you do everything correctly, guys, your bench, when you set up and you press, it'll look something like the following clip right here. So as you can see, grab the bar from the back, get myself set up, make sure my grip is on point, pull myself up, rotate my shoulders underneath, then reset myself, go back so my feet can be reset, and then push down the bar, get in the right position, and then from there, get the load, take the bar over my chest, and then, for instance, I personally do a bit of a hard sink, so I let it sink a little bit, pause, and then boom, right up. And that right there was 250 pounds, guys. It was actually my last warm-up. So what I'm gonna actually have playing now is, while I explain the rest of the stuff, I'm gonna have some working sets playing of my 275 7x3 that I did like a day or two ago. I forget, I think it was 2 days ago. And guys, just letting you know, you'll see from the first set, this was like an RP 5.5 on the first set. By the last set, it was still like a 6.5. It moved extremely well, guys. So, what I wanted to just go over, guys, is this is the way that I bench. I do want to say that it's not necessarily going to be the way that your bench is going to look. Everyone's setup is going to be slightly different based on the nuances of their anatomy. But what I am going to say is the general aspects that I said, these are things that anyone can use. So, some basic things to jot down, I guess you could say, to keep in your mind is you want to make sure that especially if you're a powerlifter, having a good arch is going to make your bench a lot stronger, because it does shorten the range of motion. And I personally, like, the arch that I've managed to create, it took me time. It's not necessarily something that you can do in one time. It does take some amount of mobility to be able to get into that position, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. On top of that, my foot positioning is something that I can do. It's not necessarily something that everyone can do. I have relatively shorter femurs, so it's not hard for me to dig my feet really far under my body. But for instance, if you're someone who has longer legs, so I've met people who have very long femurs, it's very hard for them to get their knees to go underneath their hips. So something that I would really suggest for people like that, if you want, try to widen out your base. So essentially, the way I bench is my feet, the angle of my feet, if you're looking up from above, it's not very steep in the sense that my feet aren't really placed far out wide. If you have really long femurs or any sort of like anatomy nuance that like it's making it really hard for you to jam your knees underneath your hips, what I recommend doing is widening out your base. So basically have your feet out wider than I'm doing it, as wide as you need to go, because this allows you to still be able to get get a solid plant, but at the same time it gives you more space so that you can still jam your knees underneath your hips. That's something that, for instance, some of my friends on my team do. They'll have really wide bases when they bench, and it helps them out a ton. So I'd really recommend it to some of you guys out there. But once again, it's totally up to you the way you do it. When I bench, like you guys have seen, my base is pretty short. I keep my feet relatively close to the bench in comparison to some other benchers, but it's because I can do it and it's more comfortable for me. That is something that I'm grateful for. It just happens to work out that way because of the way my body's built. But like I said, guys, don't try to necessarily emulate anyone's bench. You know, it's gonna take time to figure out exactly what feels right for you. But once you do sort of start playing with the general tips and tricks, you will find a position that works for you. And on top of that, something else to address that some people have been asking me before is like why I prefer like a sink on my bench as opposed to just like a shallow touch. I've done both like a soft touch, and I'm now doing like a hard sink. And you know, I've heard from a lot of people not to do a hard sink, but I think that if you do it correctly, in the sense that you don't lose positioning while you're sinking, you can have a hard sink that still has a certain amount of technical prowess. Because the problem with hard sink that I've noticed is you'll see that a lot of guys who are hard sinking, they'll lose their elbow positioning because when you sink down, it kind of moves your shoulders forward. And what this means that either your shoulders move forward or your elbows have to basically go out of line. So instead of being a straight line when you press up, they start slightly facing forward, and then you have to kind of push it into position. But the way that I hard sink is I try to essentially move it up, and I try to brace my ribs and my core into the bar. So I actually start from a shallower position that I would normally be able to press, and once I sink into the position, I actually sink into a position where my elbows are still straight. So I don't let it sink so far down that my elbows lose positioning. I end up sinking to the spot where I would want to press if I was going to do a soft touch. It's kind of hard to do, and it's really awkward in the beginning to find that spot because you're basically overcompensating. I have to arch a lot more than I would otherwise to find that position where when I sink, it's still straight. But if you find it, I think it is an amazing tool because I found that being able to now bench like this, the power that I get is just, it's incredible, and I still feel really good, guys. Like, I don't feel like I'm losing positioning at all. I'm keeping a really, really strong brace while I'm doing it, and I'm sinking into a position where my elbows are not losing positioning and they're still straight. So I still am pressing straight through the bar. So it's something to keep in mind, guys. It's something that might help you out. I don't know. Let me know if you do try it out. But that's more or less it for the video, guys. I think I more or less covered essentially everything. If there's anything that I missed that you guys were wondering, do let me know in the comments below. But, you know, this is what's been working on my bench, and, you know, hopefully, I mean, nothing has really changed that much in the past few months besides switching over to hard sink, but I've been benching essentially the same way for like the past, I would say 7 or 8 months since I fixed my form, and this is what's been giving me the most progress, guys. This consistent bench pattern is what's working the best, and I think if you guys find that position where you can basically press from the strongest position possible for your body and you stick with it, then your bench, and any lift for that matter, is just gonna go up as long as you stick to the volume, stick to the low RPE, you know, keep using submaximal training, and you don't just keep going for PRs all the time. So that's more or less it for the video, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope I answered most of your questions if you had any. If not, like, let me know. I'll definitely address it in the comments. And other than that, guys, I'll see you all in my next video, and peace out.